Where three continents meet, and on the east of the Arabian Peninsula, the Sultanate of Oman covers an area slightly smaller than Great Britain. It has given its name to a gulf, and the Arabian Sea is also called the Sea of Oman. Unlike its neighbors, the Emirates of the Arabo-Persian Gulf, Oman possesses impressive mountains reaching 3,000 meters in altitude. In the southwest of the country begins one of the largest sand deserts in the world, the Rub Al-Khali, also called the Desert of Deserts. But the geography here can surprise you. In the south, the mountains are high enough to stop the summer monsoon clouds. The heavy rain from the Indian Ocean waters the land copiously. Everywhere else, when there's no water, the soil is harsh and offers few resources to living creatures. Even so, certain animal species have managed to adapt between the desert areas and the seashores. The first traces of humans appeared here several thousands of years ago. The capital, Muscat, was founded in the 1st century AD. It has a strategic position at the entrance to the Arabo-Persian Gulf. The Portuguese settled here at the beginning of the 16th century. They stayed until the Ottomans arrived a century and a half later. The departure of the foreign powers intensified the rivalry between the great families of the region. Each tried to take power by taking over the Portuguese strongholds and building new fortresses. Their number shows how much Oman has been coveted over the centuries. In 1970, the country officially became the Sultanate of Oman. Spread among several tribes, the Bedouins of Oman are now largely settled. But they remain very attached to their customs and their traditional values. Women participate in public life. They have access to education and have had the right to vote since 1997. Some have even become ministers. Women can make a career in the civil service, where their salary is equal to that of men. With an average of 5 children per family, the population is very young. 60% of Omanis are under 20. The few cities in the Sultanate are very large. The architecture draws its inspiration from ancient medieval cities. From the end of the 19th century, the time of the British Protectorate, the Victorian influence can be observed. There are many Arabian references. Western skyscrapers, numerous in the neighboring Emirates, are not present. As elements of everyday life, the traditions are unchanging. Hospitality is second nature to the Omanis. Dates are offered as a sign of welcome, and the tea ritual is an Anglo-Indian inheritance. The same gestures are repeated tirelessly, whether it's grinding the grain or preparing coffee. In the past, frankincense was worth as much as gold. It made the fortune and the fame of Oman, even though there have always been a variety of resources. Malik Al-Hinal, museum director.
Dried sardines, dates, and also dried lemon, all towards Africa, to Iran, to India. And we used to bring back a lot of items from Africa, would be like cloves, coffee from India would be rice, and from other places, different spices we have.
Oman has 200 varieties of date palm. The tree occupies 60% of cultivatable land. Thanks to careful management of farmland, the production of fruit and vegetables is sufficient to satisfy local needs. The species cultivated are selected according to their requirement for water. Oman has a lot more water than neighboring countries. But that doesn't mean that any is wasted. The country's water supply comes notably from the monsoon rains, which from June to September fill the oases. Rivers and water tables in the south. Some of the water contains minerals with curative properties. Blue tankers deliver supplies of drinking water to even the most remote villages. They form part of the Omani landscape, and many here rely on their regular visits. Even the camels, who don't drink much, wait for them. Also present are water towers, either made of beaten earth or plastic. Some villages still have the irrigation system, the falaj, built by the Persians in the 6th century BC. To exploit all the land, they practice semi-nomadic animal farming, of which the camel is the mainstay. Oman's commercial role has continued for 2,000 years, even if the products traded have changed. Oil reserves are smaller than those of its neighbors, but the black gold still accounts for 90% of exports. Very promising gas deposits are taking over, which is a stroke of luck for the country, as it wants to reduce its dependence on oil for energy. Trade developed thanks to the Dhow, a type of boat from the Red Sea. The wooden pieces were originally held in place by ropes. The country also has a long tradition in weaving and textiles. All the products that have made the Sultanate famous are to be found in the souks, starting with frankincense, a dried resin. Many small craftsmen continue to work in traditional trades, and sometimes their businesses develop. The town of Muscat stretches along the coast, weaving between numerous hills. The capital is very spread out, and because of its geography, it's impossible to see all of it at once. Whilst the city is crisscrossed by roads today, in the past it was only accessible by sea. The old defense systems are still part of the scenery in the sheltered port, which high-tonnage ships can access. At first glance, the town's horizontal lines are surprising. No tall buildings. Only the minarets stretch towards the sky. The corniche is the place for a stroll. Men wear traditional dress, the dish dasha. The gold of the cupulas contrasts with the women's flowing black garment, the abaya. The Bay of Muscat is dominated by two imposing fortresses and observation towers. It was the Portuguese who decided to build them at the end of the 16th century. The plan was to make the town secure after an attack by the Ottomans. In the shelter of the fortifications are the main government offices. The royal palace is also there, behind gates bearing the Sultan's coat of arms. Oman is a hereditary monarchy, where the Sultan commands great respect. In the souks, perfumes are everywhere. Women and men send their traditional dress with it. Another tradition, unleavened bread is cooked on the walls of a cylindrical oven. Jewelry can demonstrate the role Oman has played in history. All types of precious materials have passed through here. Often, metals such as silver arrived in ingots to be shaped and engraved by renowned craftsmen. Muscat continues its development, but the town still hasn't turned its back on its history. At every roundabout, there's a reference. Here, a giant incense burner, and there, the coat of arms of the monarchy. Everywhere, these symbols punctuate the passage of Oman towards the modern world like beacons. Hospital, university, one modern facility after another. Many are named after Sultan Qaboos. The university was founded in the mid-1980s on the initiative of the monarch himself. The Grand Mosque in Muscat is also dedicated to Sultan Qaboos. The complex is a pure marvel of contemporary Muslim architecture. The buildings cover 40 hectares, and yet the pure lines and the materials used give an impression of great lightness. A 14-meter-high crystal chandelier, a 70-meter-long prayer carpet, the product of 4 years of work for 600 Iranian craftsmen. Everything here is in the superlative. Ceilings, stained glass windows, and mosaics are of an extraordinary richness. Early in the morning, on the outskirts of the town, the fishermen start work. The net is full. It's not easy to drag it up the beach. Thousands of silvery flashes are reflected on the surface of the water. Sardines are plentiful in the Sultanate of Oman, to the extent that the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations is proposing to feed them to livestock to make up for the lack of grazing. All the traditions are on show in the Muscat Festival, which takes place in January or February. People come from all over the country for the occasion. In a copper cauldron, they prepare halva, hazelnuts and sesame seeds, eggs, sugar, saffron and cardamom form a mixture to which starch is added. It's brought to the boil for at least 2 hours. This is the favorite sweet of Omanis. Delicious. During the festival, artisans come from all over the country to present their specialities. Men are separated from women in Muslim society. It's a fundamental rule here. In the making of everyday objects, a wide variety of materials is used by the craftspeople, in particular plant fibers. The gestures and attitudes are repeated endlessly. All professional categories and natural environments are represented. The best craftwork has a living display case here. From the sea to the mountain, and from the village to the desert. People relax by playing awalis. And they even study the Quran in a small madrasa, an Islamic school. In the extreme north of Oman, and very close to Iran, you have to pass through the Emirate of Fujairah, one of the United Arab Emirates, to reach the Musandam Peninsula. The high cliffs of limestone rock lead to the Strait of Hormuz, which controls the access to the Arabo-Persian Gulf. The town of Kasab owes its existence to a fort constructed in the 16th century. In the Sultanate, the fortifications and other defensive works built by the Portuguese number in their hundreds. The fort of Kasab has been converted into a museum of everyday life. Fortresses were essential elements in the building of the Portuguese Empire. You'll face some seriously hilly country to reach the interior of the Musandam Peninsula. Vegetation is sparse, apart from in certain valleys where meager crops are possible. In the middle of a lunar landscape, between the folds in the rock, the trained eye can spot dwellings in the cliff itself. Further on, ancient traditional houses are sunk into the ground. Access is by a single opening. Several examples of rock art have been found on the peninsula. They date from a time when the region was not so desert-like. A series of fjords breaks up the Musandam Peninsula. A fjord is a valley carved out by the melting of a glacier. Glaciers covered the region in the last ice age, which ended about 10,000 years ago. At the end of some fjords, villages have grown up that are only accessible by sea. The extraordinary erosion caused by the glaciers reveals remarkable folds imprinted in the limestone rock. These are marine deposits that have been compressed by the movements of the Earth's crust. In the middle of a fjord, we find the ruins of a telegraph relay station built in the British period. Here, the dhows are sometimes accompanied by friendly escorts. You only need to whistle for them to appear. Dolphins. Leaving the Musandam Peninsula, you must travel 1,000 kilometers to reach the extreme south of Oman and the region of Dhofar. The profile of the shore all along the Arabian Sea is practically the same. The coast stretches out in an interminable band of sand. But the Dhofar has much higher rainfall than the other regions, and the rain feeds watercourses that never run dry. The mountains that block the clouds are even visible from the coast. The sea wears away the rocks. It even carves vertical holes, blowholes, which the water surges into. The besieged rocks can't resist for long. Arriving in the Dhofar region is spectacular. After a succession of dunes and semi-arid plains, you suddenly encounter amazing vegetation. The Dhofar occupies 1/3 of the country. The province is organized around its main town, Salalah. Salalah is the second most important town in Oman. In its development, it has had a considerable advantage over other cities. Salalah is in fact the birthplace of Sultan Qaboos. The monarch's support has been decisive in ensuring the town receives many economic benefits, particularly visible in the new town. More so than Muscat, Salalah is a royal residence. The Sultan owns a sumptuous palace where he often meets with the region's dignitaries. On the seafront in Salalah, by the Arabian Sea, you might dream of the time when the wealth of the Dhofar attracted sailors from across the world. In the souks of Salalah, fish takes precedence. The price of other products is dictated by foreign or local availability. After hydrocarbons, fishing is the most dynamic economic sector in Oman. Among the many resources of the Dhofar region, one has aroused passions for centuries: frankincense, a traditional regional speciality.
Salalah frankincense is recognized as being one of the best. You can recognize it by its characteristic smell. Frankincense has a spiritual dimension here. In our society, we use it as much to perfume the house as to protect us from misfortune. We waft the frankincense perfume in the morning and in the evening after sunset.
The best frankincense in the country is found in the souks of the Dhofar region. The Omanis appreciate it. They are sensitive to all olfactory stimulation, and perfumes in particular. Here too, they excel at marrying aromatic essences. You can spend hours testing substances and their reactions on the skin. Great French specialists have contributed to the development of perfumes, which are often prohibitively expensive. Omanis can spend even longer choosing a kuma, the traditional hat. The best are finely embroidered with silk and cotton. It's important to choose the right size, as the kuma can't be stretched. A special perfume was created when Sultan Qaboos celebrated the 25th anniversary of his coming to power. It was named Ubar, after the name of a city lost in the Al-Khali desert and sought by archaeologists for decades, up until the mid-1980s. Infrared photographs from satellites allowed the site to be identified. Today, a new town has come out of the desert. It's still called Ubar. Excavations have been carried out that have uncovered ruins and antique pottery, some of which is 4,000 years old. The frankincense tree grows in the region. It is only found in the south of the Arabian Peninsula and in Somalia. When an incision is made in the bark, the tree produces a resin similar to latex.
This is the only place you can find the frankincense tree in Oman. To obtain frankincense, you cut the bark with a knife. You leave the resin to dry, and you collect it 10 days later. Then you can extract the silver frankincense.
As if on parade, the camels march along without glancing at the vehicles. Whatever the circumstances, the creature never loses its nonchalance. Although he does hurry along when he can smell grazing nearby. The south of Oman benefits from monsoon rains. They are not as heavy as in India, but they're enough to make the usually dry land turn to green. The monsoon occurs in summer, when the humid winds blow from the Indian Ocean towards the continent. The monsoon has obvious consequences on agriculture, on the way of life, on the economy, and on the land. Without respite, the erosion cuts at the rock of the Jebels, the hills. It carves out riverbeds. The water carries along the alluvia that will fertilize other lands. At the Tawi Ataya sinkhole, erosion has penetrated the limestone to a depth of 100 meters. In ancient times, caravans of up to 2,000 camels were formed here. In the north, the Hajar Mountains stretch from one side of the country to the other. They form a real backbone for Oman. The mountains provide a natural defense for the city of Nizwa. Nizwa is hidden behind imposing walls of dried earth built in the 17th century. 10 centuries earlier, the town was the capital of the country. In order to limit the effects of cannonballs, the foundations of the central tower go 30 meters into the ground. The battle which resulted in the departure of the Portuguese was launched from Nizwa. The material of the pottery made here is identical to that of the ramparts. Pottery and brass-studded wooden chests are not the only specialities of the local craftsmen. In the past, silversmiths used to collect thalers, silver coins of the Austrian empress, to make jewelry. The silver is also worked to make the khanjar, the traditional curved dagger.
This is called, with 7 seconds, this is used by the royal family, khanjar. It's called Saidi khanjar. It's the first khanjar used here in Oman before 250 years. This is an old knife, actually. You see, it is sharp. It is very sharp.
The fighter's equipment is also made for defense.
You will defend yourself with the shield. And if they will hit you, they will hit here.
The Jebel Shams, Sun Mountain, contains a geological curiosity. At the foot of the mountain is the Al-Huta cave. It plunges 5 kilometers into the bowels of the earth. The limestone rock is dissolved by seeping water. Drop by drop, the limestone is deposited to re-solidify and make surprising formations.
In fact, Oman, the mountains of Oman are full of caves like this, but not open to the public. All the caves in Oman are made with a karst, with what we call karst system, means that they are created by the erosion of the water. This cave has been dated to be 2 to 3 million years old.
Playful nature sometimes gives these limestone formations very inventive shapes.
This is the logo of Al-Huta cave, the lion, which you can see as a shape of the lion head with 2 elephants on top. And you can even see better the shape of the shadow on the ceiling.
In the cave's museum, there's a display on the fragile underground ecosystem. Certain animals have adapted to the total darkness. One particular case is a surprising endemic species, a completely blind pink fish. Going towards the town of Al-Hamra, you follow the summits of Jebel Akhdar. In the arid mountains of the interior, the vegetation takes root in the valleys, where the runoff water gathers. The water fills up the water tables and any surplus evaporates. In spite of the big differences in daytime and nighttime temperatures, the high plateaus are not deserted. Life is possible as long as you can acclimatize. Long-haired goats are capable of withstanding very low temperatures. A village has grown up close to a wadi, a temporary watercourse. The wadi can carve deep channels in the mountain, even though it is mostly dry. Mountain oases vary a lot in size. When the valley is sufficiently wide, towns grow up. That's the case of the village of Bilad Sait in the Wadi Bani Auf. The zones allocated to living and to farming are quite distinct, and the cultivated plots are also separated from the palm grove. Every square meter has a precise purpose, and undesirables have fair warning. To the northeast of the country, the Gulf of Oman slowly widens towards the Indian Ocean, like a funnel. It's an advantageous situation that has always attracted shipping and trade. Many watercourses follow a difficult route here. Some have a particular fate, like the Wadi Shab. Before reaching the sea, the wadi was underground, but the limestone covering collapsed, opening up a hollow where the sea comes in. On the coast to the southeast of Muscat, the town of Kiryat has a cemetery like most towns in Oman. One stone marks the grave of a child, 2 stones, that of a woman, and 3, that of a man. At the end of the 13th century, the famous Phoenician traveler Marco Polo landed on the coast of Oman. He came ashore at Sur. The town benefits from a sheltered port with deep water for ships. It was the ideal place for shipyards specializing in the construction of dhows. The craftsmen from Sur work without plans and with rudimentary tools. The teak boats are caulked with shark grease and plaster. The workers are renowned for their artistic and technical know-how. They decorate the prow and the poop with sculptures. As one travels towards the southwest, the altitude of the uplands reduces. The mountains are less frequent. The height of the hills is no longer sufficient to bring rain. Under the relentless sun, the tree's growth is limited. Only a few species benefit from the situation, like the palm trees. The intermittent streams are precious. They supply a complex irrigation system. Water from the high plateaus is held in underground wells, and channels carry it to the surface. With great effort, it can be contained, but the desert is close by. The deserts of the Arabian Peninsula are the home of the Bedouins. Indeed, in Arabic, the word Bedouin means desert dweller. The dimensions of the Rub al-Khali desert will make your head spin. Its name means empty quarter. It does in fact cover a quarter of the Arabian Peninsula, an area 1.5 times the size of France. The camel has evolved in the desert like a fish in the sea. It is perfectly adapted to the environment, but even though it can go several days without water, it does have to feed. Shade is almost as rare as water in the desert. Domesticated animals clearly appreciate it. The Bedouins camp where they tend their animals, but they no longer live permanently in the desert. Their way of life has changed. The Bedouins became dispersed following the spread of Islam to North Africa and the Middle East. Although of Arabic culture and language, they've often mixed with the indigenous populations, to the extent that some people claim that there are no real Bedouins left today. In their makeshift tents, they still perpetuate the tradition of hospitality. Modern comforts have changed life in the desert. Access to drinking water is no longer a problem, and the 4x4 has replaced the camel. Who can see the advantage? Yes, the 4x4 has changed the life of Bedouins. It can also be a lot of fun in a vast playground.
To drive through the dune is not difficult, but if you don't have experience, then it becomes a big problem. But it's very easy if you have enough experience. It is big funny to drive through the dunes, because the dunes is something exceptional. In Oman, especially in this desert of Wahiba, it's very nice to drive in the dune.
One can also appreciate the desert for the imperceptible and yet very real movements of the sand. The desert inspires humility. It reminds man that he is very small in relation to nature.